Asterisk in the fall of 1700, Europe's most formidable throne was held by a man whose body had already become a living corpse. Charles II of Spain, the final Habsburg king, passed his last months in a condition so appalling that his own courtiers murmured he must be possessed by devils. Asterisk what they saw in those closing days would scar European history forever, as a dynasty that had dominated for centuries collapsed alongside the decaying flesh of its last heir. Charles II's death would not simply end the Spanish Habsburg line, it would hurl the entire continent into a ruinous war that redrew the map of power for generations to come. Asterisk yet the deepest terror was not the political fallout, but the ghastly sight of a human being slowly falling apart while frantic courtiers inflicted ever more savage rituals to save both their king and their empire. This is the tale of how centuries of royal inbreeding forged a living monument to human suffering, and how one man's prolonged agony altered the course of world history. Asterisk eyewitness testimonies and medical notes from Charles's deathbed sketch a picture so harrowing that historians still struggle to describe the full measure of his torment. What follows is not just the account of a monarch's death, but a grim testament to the ruinous price of absolute power warped by genetic disaster. The Spanish court's frantic efforts to heal their dying sovereign exposed the bleakest recesses of 17th-century medicine and superstition. Asterisk for more than 2 centuries the Spanish Habsburgs had governed one of history's largest empires, stretching from the Americas to the Philippines. By the late 1600s Spain was still a great power, yet fissures were widening in both the realm and the bloodline that ruled it. For generations the Habsburgs had married within the family, convinced it preserved the purity of their lineage and the concentration of their authority. Asterisk born in 1661, Charles II was the culmination of that deliberate inbreeding. His father Philip IV and his mother Mariana of Austria were uncle and niece, his grandparents had been first cousins, and the same tight pattern repeated across the preceding generations. By the time Charles was conceived, the family tree had knotted so tightly that his inbreeding coefficient surpassed that of a child born to brother and sister. Asterisk the court had long known their royal blood was yielding ever more fragile heirs. Charles's elder brother Philip Prospero died at 4, several other princes perished in infancy or early childhood. The survival of Charles, and his ability to sire an heir, became the sole thread holding Habsburg Spain together. Asterisk from his earliest days Charles exhibited the physical and mental afflictions that would torment him for life. He did not walk until 8, spoke indistinctly far longer, and suffered an enlarged tongue, a grotesquely protruding jaw, and a host of other deformities. Asterisk his intellect was profoundly impaired, seizures and outbursts of wild behavior plagued him. Nevertheless, upon his father's death in 1665 he was proclaimed king at the age of 4. His mother, Queen Mariana, ruled as regent, clinging desperately to the pretense that her son could one day govern a global empire. Asterisk as neighboring kingdoms circled like carrion birds, the Spanish court grew ever more isolated and fearful. Europe's balance hung by a thread. Louis XIV of France was steadily expanding his reach, while Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I worked to preserve the old order. Asterisk both monarchs possessed credible claims to the Spanish throne through Habsburg marriages and both awaited Charles II's death without issue. The succession question had become Europe's most urgent diplomatic crisis. Twice Charles was married in frantic bids to produce an heir. Asterisk his first wife, Marie-Louise of Orleans, died mysteriously in 1689, poison suspected, after failing to conceive. His second, Maria Anna of Neuburg, fared no better. Charles's ruined body made fatherhood all but impossible. By 1700, entering his final year, panic barely held the Spanish court together. Asterisk the king's health collapsed with terrifying speed. Foreign powers maneuvered openly for the coming carve-up, while courtiers resorted to ever more extreme measures, either to cure their sovereign or to wrench a legible will from him before the end. Asterisk autumn 1700 saw Charles's decline accelerate brutally. Physicians recorded that he could scarcely stand, his wasted legs refused to bear him. The infamous Habsburg jaw now jutted so far that his mouth would not close, he drooled incessantly and speech was almost unintelligible. Asterisk food tumbled from his lips when he tried to eat, swallowing grew harder by the day. The Venetian ambassador wrote that the king's face was deathly white, his eyes huge and bulging, his skin waxy and half-transparent, his hair falling out in clumps though he was only 38. Asterisk mentally he unraveled in tandem. He would stare vacant for hours, then explode into shrieks or manic laughter. Servants heard him holding long conversations with empty air or insisting invisible figures stalked him. His bowels had rebelled completely. Chronic diarrhea forced him to soil himself even during ceremonies, horrifying foreign guests. He kept down almost nothing but thin broth or watered wine, and even those were soon vomited back. Sleep abandoned him. Guards heard screams of terror all night, yet found him alone, cowering and babbling about demons. Days passed without rest, hastening his collapse. The stench rolling off his body grew so vile that courtiers drenched themselves in perfume before approaching. His breath alone could make seasoned advisors gag. Worst were the seizures, ever more frequent, leaving him thrashing on the floor, eyes rolled white, foam spilling from his mouth. Each attack stole a little more of what remained of the men. The royal doctors were helpless. Bloodletting, purging, herbs, nothing slowed the inevitable. Running out of earthly remedies, they began to suspect something supernatural lay behind the king's torment. As 1700 wore on and Charles weakened further, the court turned to ever darker explanations. Physicians, their learning exhausted, suggested the illness might not be natural. Priests and theologians were summoned, many declared the symptoms classic demonic possession. The Spanish Inquisition, still formidable, demanded exhaustive testimony before permitting exorcism. Witnesses described the king's conversations with unseen beings, his unnatural strength in fits, his impossible knowledge of distant events. The evidence convinced the court. Father Antonio Maricar, chief exorcist, examined Charles and confirmed every mark of diabolical infestation. The first official exorcism occurred on a bitter November night in the royal bedchamber. Bound to his bed, Charles reacted instantly and horrifically, screaming in multiple voices, childish shrieks mingled with bestial growls. Soon the sessions became grim public theater. Nobles were invited to watch the struggle for the king's soul. Strapped down with leather, doused in holy water, surrounded by choking incense, Charles clawed until his wrists bled and bit his tongue to bloody pulp. He roared prayers, curses, and what listeners swore were demonic tongues. Each ritual left him unconscious, skin burned, body bruised and scratched. Yet the court seized on rare moments of clarity afterward as proof the devils were losing ground. The fleeting lucidity never lasted. News of the royal exorcisms electrified Europe. The French ambassador reported to Louis XIV that Spain had lost its reason along with its king. Protestant courts cited the spectacle as proof of Catholic barbarism and Spanish decay. The Marquis de Louvel, an unofficial French observer, sent secret dispatches from Madrid that remain among the most vivid records. His Catholic Majesty offers a sight so pitiable that even enemies might pity him, he wrote. He described one exorcism as more dreadful than any torture chamber he had seen. Dr. Miguel Fernandez, the king's physician, kept meticulous notes revealing both clinical horror and professional despair. By October he recorded total digestive failure, limbs too weak to carry him, mind fading daily. He warned that the exorcisms were killing the patient faster than the disease. Queen Maria Anna wrote privately to her sister in Germany of waking to screams, of gagging on the stench of living decay, of begging for separate apartments to preserve her own sanity. She felt the entire court watching, waiting for her to work miracles where doctors and priests had failed. Servants whispered to ambassadors of finding the king crawling the corridors at night like a beast, nails torn and bleeding from clawing the walls, or kneeling in the chapel pleading for death. Nobles confessed in letters that court attendance had become an ordeal that tested the hardiest soul. The fiction of serving a reigning monarch had become a vigil over a prolonged dying. By late October 1700 everyone understood the end was weeks away. Charles never left his bed, consciousness flickered briefly and rarely. His body had shrunk to a skeleton wrapped in translucent skin. Political desperation reached fever pitch. Factions supporting the Austrian Archduke or the French Duke of Anjou fought openly while the king lay dying. In rare lucid moments scribes guided his trembling hand to sign a will, scrawls later contested as forgery or madness. Exorcisms intensified, priests kept almost permanent watch, interpreting weaker struggles as retreating demons. Medical care was abandoned entirely, pain relief was now deemed interference with divine cleansing. Queen Maria Anna withdrew completely, corresponding frantically with foreign courts to secure her future. The palace became a hushed death watch, routine life ceased. On November 1, 1700, All Saints' Day, an uncanny stillness settled. The screaming stopped. Charles lay motionless, breathing so faint attendants strained to hear it. Many took the calm as final victory over the possessing spirits. Around noon he briefly opened his eyes, seemed to recognize faces, tried to speak, produced only gurgling sounds, then slipped away again. That fleeting glimpse was his last. Death arrived quietly at about 2:30 in the afternoon, almost an anticlimax after months of horror. Physicians waited nervously before pronouncing it official. Charles had died and revived before. Protocol was observed, the body left untouched for an hour, final prayers said, the exorcist declaring the demons banished. Within hours news leaked, riders galloped across Europe carrying word that would ignite the War of the Spanish Succession. The autopsy 2 days later laid bare the full genetic catastrophe. The heart was tiny, black, and shriveled, like leather dried in the sun. The lungs were half-rotted caves. The brain was child-sized, riddled with cysts and old bleeding. Organs showed putrefaction while the men still lived. Parts of Charles II had literally begun decaying before death. The physicians concluded it was a miracle life had lasted 39 years. Death, they wrote, must have been the kindest gift imaginable. The report was initially suppressed, then leaked and weaponized across Europe as proof of Habsburg degeneracy. Armies mobilized within days. France backed Philip of Anjou, citing Charles's contested will. Austria proclaimed Archduke Charles the true heir, branding the will the product of a possessed mind. England and the Dutch, fearing French dominance, sided with Austria. Reports of exorcisms became Protestant propaganda illustrating Catholic superstition. Spain itself fractured, regions declared independence or switched allegiance the moment central authority visibly collapsed. Trade froze, bonds crashed, banks tottered. By 1701 Europe, and its colonies, were at war. The conflict lasted 13 years, killed millions, made Britain the supreme naval power, confirmed French dominance on the continent for a generation, and began Spain's long imperial decline. One genetically shattered men had ignited a global cataclysm. Modern genetics confirms Charles possessed the inbreeding level of a sibling child. The Habsburg quest to concentrate power through marriage had instead choked their lineage to death. His grotesque end became a weapon for Enlightenment thinkers attacking divine right, monarchy, and religious superstition. His autopsy is a founding document in the study of genetic disorder. His succession war ushered in an age where raw military and economic power increasingly trumped dynastic parchment. Yet beneath the grand historical forces, the story remains that of a single human being, born to unimaginable privilege, yet condemned by the very blood that entitled him to a lifetime of pain, humiliation, and terror. The court that should have shown mercy instead tortured him for political advantage right to the end. The last days of Charles II of Spain stand as both a historical warning and a timeless tragedy. Power can corrupt absolutely, bloodlines are not exempt from nature's laws, and no title on earth can shield a person from mortal suffering. The Spanish Habsburgs died with him in that quiet bedchamber on November 1, 1700, but the echoes of his agony still remind us what happens when ambition forgets humanity.